Hello, and welcome back to our series on learning Google Apps Script for HR, brought to you by Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we believe knowledge should be shared and in empowering our fellow HR professionals to really rethink how we're delivering our HR services and solution by utilizing tools that we probably already have at our disposal. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie-HR-Solutions, and in this video, I'd like to take a moment and really enhance our dashboard sidebar here. Before we get too far, we do want to create a couple more columns and items. And before we do that, I'd like to get some of the things out of the way, like perhaps change our title, uh, add a little something in here, maybe separate this a little bit, and then really draw out these spans that we can enter from the text being entered and possibly start working on utilizing this box right here by creating some conditional if then else statements and see if we can get rid of some of these buttons here. So the first thing I'd like to do is tackle these span items, these span elements here, and change the background color to where we can differentiate between this span label and the text that's being inputted by the user. So since we're using Bootstrap, what we can do is we go to Bootstrap and we're using these input groups right here. And as you can see, our span is this area right here. So with Bootstrap, or really any reputable library, you can always come down here to either the helpers or the utilities and find what it is that you're attempting to do. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to change the background color. And they have built-in templates. You can see we have .bg secondary, danger, warning, all that. And what we're really wanting to do here, just for the sake of simplicity, is I would like to match these spans with this color here. Now this title bar, if you remember right, this title bar isn't our HTML. This title bar comes from our sidebar. So it comes from our server side and it's a built-in color. And I am not exactly sure if there's a way to change that other than having to write a specific function to go in and then change this on the server side. And this piece right here is all of our personal HTML. So we can change this. So I think it'll be easier if we just take these span elements and try to match that. So it looks like it's a gray. So what we can do is we can go over here to our Bootstrap documentation. And it appears that this Bootstrap BG secondary is close. That looks a little too light. So what we'll do is we will just use this secondary piece. And when you come down, you can see how they're using that. So because it has a dot, they're indicating that it is a class of that element. So this part here we're not needing. What we're needing is this piece, and that was BG secondary. So we can come down here and hit see BG secondary, and what we're going to need is the color and then the text being white. Let's do the color first and see how that looks. Maybe we need to offset the text. But let's copy this BG secondary. Then what we can do is come up in here into our code, and we'll just pick our first span here because that's what we're wanting to change. And you see this is the class of input group text. Within HTML, you can assign or attach an element to various classes. So what we can do is we can just go to the end of this class and add another class, this BG secondary. get rid of this space here. There we go. And then when we save this and then go back to our sheet here, refresh our sidebar, you'll see that it changed that background. And you'll also see that this text here is pretty difficult to read. So what we will need to do is go in and grab that piece that they already have built in to make that text white to offer a little bit of contrast for readability. So we can go in here and place that in there, text white. Now what should happen is when we go back to our sheet here with our sidebar, refresh the sidebar, you'll see that it does that. Now it does look like it's a little bit off. If you're fine with this and you just want to say, okay, I'm good, I'm going to leave it, let's roll with it. What you do is you could go through and give this piece here to all the span classes. Just add it to every single element. And if you have a lot of elements, that could become very tedious, and you're doing a lot of copying and pasting. Now, what you could do instead is use this class here and isolate it using, basically select it using CSS, and then do it that way. So let's do that method real quick. Let's create a style tag up here on our head. We'll need closing tags. And then to isolate this is a class. So to select this class, we begin using a dot, and it is input group text. So what this is going to do is this is going to select all elements with this input group text. If you notice, the input doesn't have a class necessarily assigned to it. Then we'll need the curly brackets. Now what we want to do is do a background color. And what we want that background color to be is, we could just simply use gray. Let's remove this though, so we can actually see what it is that we're doing. We can use gray, and then we'll save this. Now, anytime you're using a library, there are times that the library will override any custom CSS. So I'm thinking that this will not register as gray. Oh, it is registering as gray. Okay, good. If this didn't register as gray, what you could come back and do is simply type important. And what this exclamation important means is that this overrides whatever the default or previous CSS value is for that input group. So I'm going to leave it. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to leave it here. Now this gray, when we go back and look at this gray isn't really the same as that. So let's figure out what this color actually is. So to do that, there's a trick that we can grab that color in the form of a hex code. We go up here to our fill color. You see how we can change this to, we can change this to whatever. What I'm looking for is this little pick a custom color. So when we click on this, you'll notice that it gives us this little searcher circle thing. And when we highlight the color that we're wanting to find, we can click it. It'll fill it, but then you can go down and actually go down here to our custom color, and you'll see it populate. Custom color is hashtag 616161. Perfect. So now we know what our hex color is, and we can use that instead of this default gray, which doesn't really match, and do hashtag 616161. And now, depending on your screen and your screen settings and your resolution, this may appear slightly off, but according to Google, this is exactly what that color is. So now we can save it, go back to our sheet here, refresh it, and there we go. It is a lot closer. But now if we're looking at this, it's pretty difficult to read because of the black text. So let's change that text using CSS. And what we can change our text to is white, and we can simply do color. Now we can either type in white or use the hex. And since we used hex up here, let's just keep it the same. Now the color for white in hex is simply 3 Fs. It's all Fs. It's hashtag all F. And we'll make this important. Now what we'll do is we'll save this and go back to our sheet here. And then refresh our sidebar. And okay, good. Good. To illustrate how we can build onto this is let's take this input text right here of the last name and then change that also to gray. Just to show you how we can change the style of something with one broad stroke of a brush, so to speak. So this span has a class, which is what we are selecting. And if we go down here to this input type, you'll see how this class is a form control. What we can do is add this class also to that. And go in here and then refresh, and you'll see that it is also incorporating that class because or that entity, that element, because it has also that class identifier. So that's how classes work within CSS. That looks horrible, so we're not going to do that. Let's just delete it and go back to the way it was. Check to make sure it looks good. Okay, so good. I am pretty happy with this. It looks good. Now I want to change this HR dashboard because it's not really a dashboard. I mean, it could easily become a dashboard depending on if you're doing calculations and showing graphs and rendering different views or whatnot. But really, this isn't a dashboard as opposed to being an administrative interface. So what I'd like to do is change this title here to HR dashboard. Now remember the title, this background piece right here, and the actual frame is the sidebar built through Google Apps Script, our server side. So what we can do is we can change and modify that to a degree. Again, we can't change the sides or the size anymore simply because the default is always 300 pics. But what we can do is come down here, and if you remember right, we actually set the title. So instead of HR dashboard, what we can call this is HR admin. And just out of curiosity, let's see if there is a way that we can do any other modifications, because you see we can set the title of that sidebar. Let's see if we can set anything else. So we can, okay, we can set content. Okay, so we can do it that way. As you can see, we can set hello world. We can also set a favicon, or however you pronounce this. I've never actually heard it used. And what this does is this actually is like this little icon here. So we could set an icon inside that. We can set, we do have a set width. I may have to explain, I may have to see that. Let's just type in 500 pics here and see if that is going to do anything. Because I heard this was depreciated, but who knows? We'll see. Open sidebar, and yep, no, it doesn't do anything. We can go back here, but as you can see, we changed the title. Let's change this to 1,000. Has to be pics. No, let's change this to 1,000 and see if what we'll do is we'll come in here and change this set width to 1,000 and see if that did anything, or if it's truly depreciated. Yep, it's depreciated. It doesn't work. Okay, so what we'll need to do is we'll just delete this. I'll play with that and see if I can figure something out. That would be great if we can change that. But okay, good. We changed our title. So let's save this. And then we'll go back to our sheet and see what else it is that we wanted to do. We'll refresh this. Okay, now what I would like to do is with this welcome piece, if you remember, that was just simply a placeholder when we were first building out our sidebar here. Instead of welcome, what I would like to do is put something a little additional. I mean, we can do welcome, and then we can do a small paragraph here. Please enter something simple. Please enter the data to create. Please enter an employee number and press and select retrieve if you're wanting to retrieve data. That way we can see how to create additional, and then maybe put another horizontal line here. So let's do that. What we will do is we will go to, remember that is our HTML piece. So we'll go to our HTML. Here is our welcome. And here, let's look at this heading 2 tag, this H2 tag where it's welcome, and let's put that welcome in the middle. So we can go back over to our text in our documentation in our Bootstrap. We could do this through CSS, but let's just use what they have here. And as you can see, we go down here to this text, and we're looking at their options here. And this is what we want: center align text on all viewport sizes. So they're using a P tag, but what we're really wanting is this class text center. Because what they're doing is they're giving this element the class of text center, which in their CSS file aligns the center of the text. So that's what we want. So let's go back over here. And what we can do is just simply add that to our H2 element. And then when we save that and refresh it, there we go. Now we have welcome. So now what we can do is actually give ourselves a little bit of a space here. And in CSS, or excuse me, not CSS, in Bootstrap CSS rather, how they create margins is this piece right here, is this class MB, which is margin bottom, and they're going down 3. I believe Bootstrap uses 3EM as a measurement. So we can simply add MB, and then we could just do 3. And what that'll do is that will create a space in between the bottom of that heading and the next element. Yep, and there we go. So now we can add in our P's, and our P is our paragraph. So again, this isn't going to be an HTML tutorial, but if you want me to do one of those, just please let me know and I will. So our P tag, what we can say in here is, um, please enter employee data to record, and then we will add in, please enter employee number and press retrieve to retrieve. So let's go ahead and add that in there. Now we could let's add a class in here just to make sure that it's starting. Text start. And where I'm getting that is, I was noticing that center is text center. Text start is having a start over here, and that is in all viewport sizes. So whatever screen size it is that the user is using. And then we want to, in that opening piece, and right here is where all of our text goes. So please enter employee data to record, to retrieve data, to retrieve data, please enter employee number and select retrieve. And then we end our paragraph tag. Perhaps we should also give it a bottom margin, and then we're going to need a handy line separator. So now we'll go back, save that, and then refresh our interface here. And there we go. So that'll be fine. We could probably give this a little bit, more spacing. Let's add in, instead of just the margin bottom, let's also add in the margins on the side. So we'll go back to our Bootstrap here and see what they have for margins. It'll be under spacing, margins, and padding. Okay, they use REM. Got it. So this is the M. We're setting the margin. So let's just keep it simple and set the M for margin. And we want left and right. So it would be MX. And then let's go 2. So we'll go MX2 and then see how that's going to look. Again, I don't want to get too fine-tuned. I just really don't like that being all the way up against it. It's going to cause me heartburn. So we'll refresh it, and yep, there we go, 2. See how that moved over? Now the one thing that I want to do is get all of these off. So there's a technique that Bootstrap built into it, and it's a good practice. And what it is to wrap everything that you have essentially in a div, and you can do a flex container, you can do a grid. It's just easier if you're wanting to move the entire HTML document or do something with it, to wrap it in a div. And typically what we do is we create a div, and that div we can give a class, and this is typical to call this class container, and then you can CSS style that class, which Bootstrap already did. Now we have to have a closing tag for this, because if we run this, then it's going to misalign. And we want this class to be before our last line here. We'll do the hashtag div. And then I like making a comment, because you can actually have like 6 or 7, depending on what the element is, 6 or 7 lines of just nothing but ending divs. And it can get confusing if you just leave those divs as is without describing them. So we can leave a comment. Now, how you leave a comment in HTML is a little bit different than how we did it in CSS or JavaScript. So if you remember, we create a comment by doing that. That does nothing in HTML. It would actually just show that on the page. But what we can do is use tags, exclamation point, 2 dashes. As you see, we did the 2 dash. It's commenting out everything below it. So what we simply want to do is say what this ending div is. And then to close that tag, we do dash dash and then a closing tag. And this is our comment in our HTML saying that this is our closing div. So now what the container does, well, it'll be best just to show you. You'll notice how everything is stretched from the end of this border right here all the way over here. Let's give a little bit of space, and that's what the container actually does. And I like how Bootstrap has their container set up because it gives just enough space, as you can see, to where it's not looking cluttered. Okay, good. Good. So we have that built out. Everything's looking good. So the next thing I want to do is anytime that we think of records within HR, records not only serve the business as terms as strategy and operation, looking at trends or the history of, say, an employee or whatnot, but it also comes in incredibly handy when we have allegations of wrongdoing. And oftentimes, when we look into those records, say we have a discrimination charge and they're saying so-and-so is discriminating because they changed my records or whatnot, we want to be able to collect who created that record. Now, what we could do is go in and just create another box here to say, identify who's creating the record, but that's not really going to hold any weight because anybody can put whatever it is that they want. To really isolate who is submitting this record, what we can do is grab their user ID. Since we're in Google, when you enter Google and you're working with a document or whatnot, it typically asks you to log in to a Google account. As you can see, ours is Prairie-HR-Solutions. And what we can do is grab that email and populate it in one of our forms here. So what we could do is we can have enter date, and then we can put user ID, and then have whatever user ID that made that record populate right here. So it'd be smith.joe@gmail. So let's create a function to at least grab that for now, just so you can see how it is that it works. And then we'll incorporate that into our record data. As you can see, this data here, this date, isn't a part of our record parameter. The record parameter is all coming from our HTML side, what the user input. What this is doing is this is creating it on the server side in this function and putting it in there. And we can actually do the same exact thing when we get our record of email, or our email record or user ID. So let's create a function down here just to illustrate how this works. Let's not use test function. Let's use user test. Let's call it that. And then how we do user test is we use a class that is built in, just like script properties, spreadsheet app. But instead of using an application, what we are going to select is this session. because anytime somebody is doing anything within Google, whether it be a Google Sheet, Google Site, what have you, it's essentially called an instance or a session. So let's type session. And now when we hit dot to separate this, we can pull up various options, and it tells you how this is actually working, gets information about the current user. Of course, depending on how your security is set up in your organization, you may not be able to get this email, but typically you can, unless it's absolutely set up to where you can't. And then you can look down here as log the email address of the person running the script. So you could actually take this piece here and use that. So what I'll do is I will just set that here. And what we're going to want to do is get the active user. And you can see that you can also get where the locale of that user is. What that does is it gives, English. If your organization is global, this does come in handy. So we want to get the active user. And then we also have options of things that we can get from that active user. Now you see this crossed out line here. You used to be able to openly get the user login ID. You can't get that anymore because the login ID is actually the email. So what we want to do is get the email. And then as you can see, they saved this in a variable. Now, I think it might be a good time to describe variables and what they do, because we did use a global variable. So you'll see instead of let, they use const. And what that is a constant. So you can declare a variable by let, or you can declare a variable by var, or you can declare a variable by constant. So a variable can actually change. It can mutate. It can transform. So we can take this variable and actually change what that variable represents based on a situation. Now, when you declare it as a constant, you can't change it. It is that. This email variable will always be that. You can't change it. Now, what let does and var, let allows you to change the contents of this. That's why I've been using let. So for now, let's change that variable. Let's create a variable. Let's create this as user ID, and let's set that equal to that. And then we won't need this anymore, but we do want to log it and see what it populates. So let's log in our user ID. Now what we want to do is we want to save this and run this function here. So we want to run user test. Now, when you run this function, it's going to interact differently. It's not only going to interact with the sheet, but it's going to interact with the entire session. So we'll have to review our permissions. I'll go through that here real quick. I'm just going through and authorizing it, the things that we've done a few times here. So now, as you can see, what it did was it reached up and grabbed my user ID. So what we can do is we can take this line right here, copy it, and we can put it right here. And then instead of having it logged, we want to put it right after the date, or maybe we can put it right in front of the date. User ID. Now what we'll have to do, and we'll do this in the next video, is since we moved over everything one column, we're going to have to modify our numbers. But we'll do that after we add in another field. But let's go ahead and save this. Well, actually, let's get rid of this function. We don't need this anymore. Keep it somewhat clean. So let's save this. And then let's go back to our sheet here. There we go. And we will refresh our sidebar. Now when we go in and type in something, we have 89. We'll do Jonas, division. Let's make him this person maintenance, technician. Our technicians make 65K. Our date of hire, remember we took off that selector. We'll maybe put that back in if we have time and we want to create the record and then we want to record. Now when we go down, you'll notice everything shifted over, but now we actually have the user ID who created that record. And then what we can do is simply just shift all these over to the right to realign it. Probably should have did that as well. Insert cell, shift it over to the right, and then we can put user name. So now what we have to do is we have to go through our code and ensure that we are placing the right information in the right columns, which we can do our next video. But for now, I want to end this video. It's getting kind of long. And the next video, we will realign the code, and then we'll also add a note section here, a note box. And then we will work on the if conditional statements to get rid of these so we can prepare ourselves for our updating function. So thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you next time. Please take care.